Cucumbers, Karen.
Apparently,
Mazel tov.
there's been a harvest of cucumbers. So that's fantastic.
So on that note.
Well, no, there also was, and I agree with this. Someone Shehakayona moment was, I think it was Michelle Oxman. Her Shehakayona moment was how beautiful your singing is, Rebecca, and thank you for that.
My Shehakayona moment is to be able to do it. So thank you. All right, on that note, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Amen.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we are in for a real treat right now. A Devar Torah given by our own force of nature and social justice, Judy Caplan. I always listen carefully to Judy when she shares her insights on Torah, because it usually means she's going to say everything that I was going to say and better, and I don't have to turn my camera on Saturday mornings. For those of you who haven't met Judy, she and her husband Jim relocated here from Pittsburgh about 6 years ago. Since then, Judy has shared her passion for social justice with our community. She is a member of the Beth Emmet board, but beyond that, she's a leader of the advocacy pillar of our Social Justice Coalition. And Judy lives her beliefs. She believes that direct action is good. Direct action can solve problems, but advocacy is how you get in there and you solve them. So please let's welcome Judy, who now is going to give us her thoughts on this week's Parsha.
Thank you, Neil. It's an honor to speak before you this evening. Now, if you know me, you know that usually my words end in a request. So fair warning, I am going to ask you to do something, but not right now. Right now, I have a question. What do you do when a law is unjust? What do you do when almost 400 potential laws are unjust? Perhaps we can find the answer in this week's Parsha, Pinchas. Here, near the end of the book of Numbers, comes this amazing story of how 5 women, Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah, often known as the daughters of Zelophehad, but I say their names because we have learned how important it is to acknowledge a person's humanness by referring to them by name. So once again, Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah, 5 sisters who had the courage to write their own piece of Torah and teach us lessons of how to respond when we see an injustice, even if the injustice exists in our most sacred text. The basic story is this. In preparation for entering the land of Israel, God has recently given the laws of land inheritance. And the standard rule is that when the head of a household dies, the land will be divided among the sons in the family. Now, a modern ear can probably already hear the problem with this formula. It's so obvious. What about the daughters? The daughters of Zelophehad see this problem and decide to act. The 5 sisters step forward before Moses, Eleazar, the high priest, and the whole assembly, and are given the opportunity to plead their case. The sisters eloquently speak. Let not our father's name be lost, just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. And Moses, the great leader, has no idea what to say to them. So he brings their case before God, and God's response is one of the most surprising lines in the whole Torah. And God says to Moses, Cain benot Zelophehad dovrot. Yes, the daughters speak correctly. Transfer their father's share to them. God emphatically approves their request, and then some. The sisters not only won the right to inherit their father's land, but also single-handedly provoked the law changing for future generations of women. For God continues, furthermore, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a man dies without leaving a son, transfer his property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers. Not a total victory for women's equality, but a start. That's it. The sisters are right. And just like that, the law has been changed. There was a clear rule given by God. It was contested based on a fairness principle. And then God, the ultimate and absolute source of truth and justice, simply affirms the merit of the claim and rewrites the law. Now, this is astounding and really radical for all kinds of reasons. Jewish tradition often operates on the assumption that biblical law is perfect and unchanging. Yet here, in this story, we see the Torah actually amending itself. It is as if God hears the women challenging the legitimacy of a divine edict and responds, oh, good point. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, yeah, let's just change it. What? What kind of God is this? And what kind of law is this? How do we explain this? Rashi, the single most influential Torah commentator of the Middle Ages, and I might add, the father of daughters, gives us two answers, each very different. Rabbi David Kasher explains. First, Rashi comments on the word Cain in the phrase, Cain benot Zelophehad dovrot. The daughters of Zelophehad are speaking correctly. This indicates that the daughters have understood the matter as it is actually written before God on high. To quote Rashi, their eyes saw what Moses' eyes did not see. What they saw was the Torah that God had laid out in heaven. In this real Torah, women could not be shut out of inheritance. Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah somehow knew this to be true. They recognized the equality of men and women in God's eyes, despite the differentiation in the society of their time. God could not be a sexist. So even though Moses heard it from the mouth of God, these women are saying, you must have heard it wrong. Perhaps you want to check again. And when Moses did, case done. With this explanation, these five sisters are seen as some sort of mystical prophets accessing a higher truth. But Rashi provides another explanation. There is another reason the daughters spoke correctly. Their claim was well-founded. The daughters were not prophets accessing some higher truth. They were citizens, and they had a claim against the law. They thought the law was unfair, and so they brought a claim. They made their case, and God conceded. God admitted they were right. There had been an oversight in the original drafting of the law. These women challenged the legitimacy of the law, and they won. Rashi comments, happy is the person with whose words God agrees. This too is a radical answer. God's eternal word is not so eternal. So which is it? What do we do when we see a law that we believe to be unjust? Do we try to find the greater truth, seek some divine inspiration, pray for intervention and change? Or do we craft well-founded claims and seek a just resolution? Do we approach those who can change the law and present our reasons for why the law must be changed? My work as a social justice advocate leads me to this latter approach. I view Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milka, and Tirzah as disenfranchised human beings seeking a more just society. They were 5 women giving voice to their lived experience and making a claim for just treatment. They were asking to be counted. And that means their example is one we can follow. If our claim is well-founded, well-reasoned, and well-argued, well then maybe, just maybe, we can trigger a change in the law and we can be brought closer to a more perfect world. This July 4th weekend, we celebrate the 244th birthday of our country. As we celebrate, it makes sense to pause and ask, who counts in our country? And what is the significance of being counted? The 2020 election resulted in the highest number of votes ever cast and counted, and the highest turnout in over a century. In January, the citizens of Georgia turned out in record numbers for a runoff election to select 2 senators. The winners were Raphael Warnock, the first Black senator to represent Georgia, and John Ossoff, the first Jewish senator ever elected in Georgia. Following this overwhelming turnout of citizens exercising their right to vote, expressing their values, coming forth to be counted, the backlash began. Over 400 state laws have been introduced which restrict access to voting. 28 of these laws have been enacted. Last May, the Brennan Center for Justice issued a report titled Equity for the People. The report states, quote, at the same time that we saw record voter turnout, we saw one of the largest scale attempts to disenfranchise Americans, especially voters of color, in at least half a century. A racially tinged big lie of widespread voter fraud intended to cast doubts on the validity of many votes cast by voters of color was spread. While this claim is baseless, it continues to be used as a justification for the introduction of restrictive voting laws, end quote. What has been the reaction to the passage of these restrictive laws? Congress has acted by drafting 2 vital pieces of legislation. The first is the For the People Act, or H.R. 1, Senate 1. This legislation has passed the House and is stalled in the Senate. According to the Lawyers' Committee for Civil Rights under Law, and I quote, the For the People Act will significantly increase access to the ballot box, helping communities of color, senior citizens, young people, people with disabilities, and other communities have their voice heard. This bill includes numerous provisions such as requiring automatic voter registration and establishing processes for people with disabilities to register to vote and request an absentee ballot by mail, which will eliminate modern forms of voter suppression. Many of the provisions in the recently state-enacted voter suppression laws would be flatly and retroactively prohibited by H.R. 1. The second bill is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, also known as H.R. 4. This legislation aims to restore provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which were struck down by the Supreme Court, first in 2013 with the Shelby County versus Holder case, and yesterday when the Supreme Court ruled that two Arizona laws, which lower courts had previously ruled unconstitutional and explicitly racist, will be allowed to stand. This is bad news for upcoming legal challenges to voter restrictions in other states. As the New York Times editorial page today declared, quote, "The Supreme Court shows no interest in thwarting attacks on democracy and protecting America's fundamental constitutional right to vote." These court decisions tell us one thing: Congress must take action to protect our freedom to vote by passing the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Passage of these two bills will promote ballot access, strengthen our democracy, and work to make our governmental institutions truly representative of the electorate. It is up to us to make the case. How do we do this? How do we make our claim? Here is what I propose. And here comes my ask. Ready? Please take a minute and complete this sentence. I believe voting is important because. Get in touch with what it really means to you to be able to vote. Now, either share your answer with someone nearby or write it in the chat. Late last year, the Reform Movement launched Every Voice, Every Vote, the Reform Movement's civic engagement campaign, with a focus on combating voter suppression. As Reform Jews, we are called to continue the fight for racial justice and fulfill the sacred work of creating a more just, compassionate, and whole world. As part of this effort, Reform Jews across the country will meet virtually with their US senators between July 26th and August 6th to advocate for passage of the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Here in Illinois, we already have a meeting scheduled with Senator Durbin for July 27th at 9 a.m. Mark that down. Folks are still working to schedule a meeting with Senator Duckworth. Yes, Senator Durbin and Duckworth are supporters of each of these bills, so there's no need to convince them that protecting the rights for all eligible voters is important. The purpose of our meeting is to demonstrate that the Jewish community strongly supports these two pieces of legislation and to request that they fight as hard as they can for passage. Right now, Senate support and opposition for the For the People Act is equal, 50-50. It is anticipated that the John Lewis Act will pass the House, but a filibuster-proof vote in the Senate is unlikely. Winning will go to the side that fights the hardest. I hope that's our side. Senator Durbin, as Majority Whip, has great power in the Senate. At our July 27th meeting, we hope to have Zoom screen after Zoom screen after Zoom screen of concerned citizens showing up and asking that he fight like hell to make these bills law. We need to demonstrate with our presence in large numbers that his constituents strongly, very strongly support these pieces of legislation. I ask that you be on one of those screens. If you have any questions, please send them my way. If you are ready to say, I will be there, let me know that as well. Information on how to register for the Durbin meeting will be in upcoming Emmett mails. Be sure to look for them. My goal is to have a Zoom screen full of Beth Emmett members, a double minion, 20. Please help me reach my goal. Let the story of Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milka, and Tirza remind us that when the cause is just, and when we muster the courage, we can change the world, not only for ourselves, but for those around us and for generations to come. We can present our claims, offer our reasons, explain why unjust laws need to be changed. By doing so, we can come closer to a more perfect world. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.